recording. Here we go. Good to go.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your summer to come join us at another Zoom meeting. Here, I just want to go over some rules about how we engage via Zoom. So to prevent Zoom bombing, we have disabled your video, speaking, and screen sharing functions, but you can communicate via chat. So we will have intermissions where we'll take questions where you can do so on video and with your actual voice. You can leave and rejoin the meeting at any time unless we're at capacity. I doubt that'll be a problem today. Again, there'll be multiple opportunities for questions throughout the presentation. If you wanted to look at the slide presentation on your own time, you can get that at a2gov.org/lowertown. Next slide. And again, if you want to communicate during the presentation, do so via chat. And if you're calling in by phone, you can hit *9 to ask a question. We wanted to establish some meeting norms so that things don't get out of control. Commit to learning and avoid speculation. We encourage you to ask questions through the chat feature so that we can explore the issue together. When speaking over the phone, please move to a quiet area and silence any background noises. Also remember the importance of rights and the dignity of others in the conversation. So we ask that you critique ideas and not people, and are thoughtful about your language so that this can be a comfortable and respectful forum for all participants. Inappropriate written or verbal comments or language, including personal attacks or accusations, will result in you being removed from the meeting. So behave yourselves, please. Meeting summaries will be posted by Monday, June 14th on the project website, and your feedback will be considered in addition to the technical and cost considerations for the recommendations of this study. And I'll turn it over to, who's that? Is it Eric's turn?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Lauren. Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Dreyer. I'm a transportation planner with OHM Advisors. We are the lead consultant on this project and working with the team that you see here. This is the third public meeting for the Lowertown Area Mobility Study. Today, we're going to be looking at potential solutions and alternatives for the project, and start to think about what those are and what issues or things you like about them. So to go through the project team, I think you see everybody on the Zoom screen, and you've heard from Lauren, you heard from myself. We have Steve Deering, who's our traffic engineer, Steve Loveland, who's the project manager. He's going to be talking later on in the project or in this presentation about the specific recommendations. And then Heather and Luke are from the city. Heather's from the planning department, and Luke is the engineering project manager on this. So this project, we've been working on it for a while now, and we've shown these few slides here just as a primer to what we've been doing. But wanted to kind of give you the info about why are we doing this study. Lowertown is a pretty interesting, dynamic place. There's a lot of different things happening here, and really what we've found is that there needs to be a holistic view of transportation in the Lowertown area. We're looking at not just vehicle travels, vehicle trips, but also the way people get around by bike, by walking, by transit, and other modes. Really considering all the travelers who are coming through the area, both local and from commuters or folks from other parts of Ann Arbor. And the overall goal of the project is to make traveling around the neighborhood, the area, easier, safer, and more efficient. All of the recommendations we're looking at are kind of looking at that through that lens, trying to encourage folks to use all modes that they have available to them. So what we're looking at specifically, we're looking at opportunities to make traveling easier within Lowertown. There's a couple of major traffic generators that we found in the U of M hospital, downtown Ann Arbor, the A2 STEAM School, and U of M North Campus, which are either within or very close to the study area. And people are kind of going through this neighborhood or coming from this neighborhood to these traffic generators and contributing to the movements through the neighborhood. But specifically, we're going to be looking at traffic congestion, vehicle traffic congestion, how folks are able to bike and walk around the neighborhood, what those connections look like, what the safety portions of that look like, how you're able to get around using public transit where there's deficiencies in service or amenities or stops or just general routing. Safety issues that may be a result of outdated engineering standards or roadways that just haven't been updated in a long time, and intersection designs, which can help improve through cars moving through, and vehicle or bikes and pedestrians for that matter. The study process, it's been, we're maybe 18 months into this 2-year process, about 75% complete. We've gone through the conditions analysis, project vision and goals, and we're at the part now of solution development. And we're looking at what those potential solutions might be to some of the issues in the neighborhood and in the lower town area. And we're going to start to refine and evaluate those down to what the priority improvements might be. The next and final step is the final recommendations, and that'll be part of the final report and document. The overall outcomes of the study, we're looking to identify ways to improve mobility for all users. We've hit on this a little bit already, but drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, transit riders, new mobility, bike share, scooter share, whatever it may be. Everything is considered in this study. And kind of at a higher level to that, we're looking at how these opportunities can help change travel habits. Kind of right now, people are used to just getting in their car and driving to where they need to go because that's the only way to do it. That's what they're used to. How can we, through some infrastructure design, through other ideas that we come up with this, help to change the way people get around Lower Town and around Ann Arbor. And maybe it starts out at 1 or 2 times a week or 1 or 2 trips a week. But every trip that we take or that you take that's not in a vehicle, that helps reduce demand on the system. And these are the kind of innovative solutions that we're looking to help improve efficiency of the transportation system, because there's not a lot of places to build out, I guess. Capacity is kind of stuck where it is. So today we're going to be looking at those recommended mitigations, alternatives, solutions. And we really want your input on what you think about these. So what we've heard so far, we've talked to a number of different stakeholder groups, folks at the city, the public, and we've gotten a really good idea of what's happening in the neighborhood and in the Lower Town area that we think we need to address. So there's a lot of gaps in both pedestrian and bike non-motorized facilities. There are very few walkable businesses in the area. So if you do need to run errands, it's typically a car trip. The population is growing. There's a lot of new development happening. And some of those new developments may not have adequate parking, which is leading to some issues on the neighborhood streets. There's a lot of peak hour congestion from commuters coming in from potentially out of town, other sides of Ann Arbor, to hit those major traffic generators that we talked about. The public transit is inadequate for folks to use as a car replacement or a vehicle replacement. And really what we've found is that everything is kind of stemming from the limited crossing opportunities of the river. Pretty much everything that's coming through the neighborhood either has to go over the Broadway Bridge or over to Fuller Road. And that causes backups upstream and throughout the area. We had a series of office hours a few months ago, and we had one every week for a month, I believe, and each one was on a different topic. So we had some specific discussions about non-motorized traffic, about vehicle traffic, and other topics, and some specific areas in the study area were identified that needed safety improvements. A lot of residents don't feel comfortable walking and biking in the area. They want to, but it's just not they don't feel safe doing it. We mentioned transit. Transit has typically isn't fast enough or frequent enough for people to use on a daily basis. And there's a lot of heavy traffic that comes in off of M14. The bike infrastructure is connected. A lot of the pedestrian infrastructure is disconnected. So people are riding or walking in the street. There were some safety concerns around the A2 STEAM school that were causing some headaches, specifically at rush hour in the morning when kids are being dropped off. And we mentioned the new developments, and that's also adding to some of the traffic. And there's fears that more development is going to add even more to the traffic. And really, there are some large safety conflicts between bikes and pedestrians on certain parts of the boardwalk on Barton Drive and around the study area. I believe with that, oh wait, no, there's one more slide for me. Some opportunities that we heard through the office hours and through the stakeholders were improving transit frequency and visibility, improving the connection to the hospital via walking, easier access to the border-to-border trail, which runs right along the river there. Making sure that retail and mixed use is incorporated into new developments so that folks can run errands within the neighborhood and walk and bike and do so without having to drive. Making sure that snow is cleared from sidewalks and bike lanes in the winter because people want to ride and walk all year round. Adding safe crossing infrastructure in specific places around the school, on Pontiac Trail. There's a couple other areas that Steve is going to talk about. And trying to create a cultural shift to get people to feel more comfortable walking and biking and do it on a more daily basis. And part of that is kind of educating the public on how to safely use streets, both as a driver and as a pedestrian and a cyclist. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Loveland, and he's going to talk about the
I'm going to touch on all the different modes that we've been looking at. But before I get into those, I thought I could just quickly touch on a few of the questions that were up there. There was one, is there documentation that new development parking is inadequate? The last three slides that Eric just went through, those were what we got out of the stakeholder engagement. We had multiple meetings with stakeholders around the community, and those slides were just the findings that came out of that, along with the office hours. The office hours that Eric talked about were Zoom meetings where the public was invited to come in, and it was basically documenting what we heard from them. We have not prepared any type of analysis that says development parking is inadequate. What I do remember hearing is that I think it was maybe the businesses in the area were lacking parking. Was that the gist of it, Eric? I don't want to dwell on that, but
I think it was a combination of the new large development and some of the businesses anecdotally not having enough parking and people parking up on like Broadway and some of the other neighborhood streets, and then walking down and just leaving their cars there for days at a time, essentially, because there's again, this is anecdotal. It's only what we heard from some neighborhood residents, but it was kind of related, I guess, to the new apartments.
Okay, and then there were a few other comments that talk about high speeds and troubles crossing. I will touch on speed management. later in the presentation, and then more on specific areas and treatments that we're looking to do. I'll just get into, well, let me see. We're going to have a question and answer after each of these brief topics that I cover. But again, I'm Steve Loveland. I'm the project manager for this Lower Town study. So for this study, there was 4 main areas that we focused on. And it was the pedestrian, the bicyclist, the transit, and motor vehicles. So as I present this, I'm going to go through first what we looked at for pedestrians. I'm going to stop, see if there's specific questions we want to answer. Then move on to the bicyclists, do the same with the question and answer, transit, and then on to motor vehicles. At the end of after motor vehicles, we're going to, or as part of the motor vehicles, we're going to get into some intersection specific or area specific improvements. And then at the very end of the presentation, it'll be more system-wide and speed management ideas and what we could implement. So the first topic I'm going to touch on is the pedestrians. And we used multiple tools to look at pedestrians in the area. And the first one was the Pedestrian Environmental Quality Index. And what this did is we went out and did field survey of all the roads in the Lower Town area and looked at what was available for pedestrians. This was all documented. And then we used this to prepare a tool that visually gave us an idea of what things were like out there. We also did a road safety audit. It was a week-long road safety audit. We spent a lot of time out surveying the area and just looking for all the safety issues in Lower Town. NCHRP, this is a document, Improving Pedestrian Safety for Unsignalized Crossings. We used that and we looked at all the unsignalized crossings in Lower Town to determine are they adequate with how they're striped and signed, or if there were improvements needed. And then, as you've already seen, we did the public and stakeholder engagement throughout the project. Eric, do I have control? Do you know? Okay. So as part of that inventory of the pedestrian infrastructure, we went over this in past presentations, so I don't want to dwell on it, but what this is basically showing is that we looked at all the intersections, we looked at all the segments, and if it's yellow, it's saying basic pedestrian conditions exist. And if it's red, it's saying it's unsuitable for pedestrians. So an unsuitable area might be there's no sidewalk, there's not crossings for all the legs of an intersection. Suitable would be there's sidewalks, there's crossing, or there's street lights. That's just some of the things it looked at. So the major pedestrian findings out of all these different things we've done, there was a recommendation that came from the public about putting in rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And this was near the school along Pontiac Trail. High emphasis crossings. This came out of the study of the unsignalized intersections. It ended up giving us a number of locations that we could improve or enhance the crossings. Ramp upgrades. If you see the bottom left or the center picture, there's a sidewalk that leads into the road and there's no ramp for the pedestrian. The picture on the far left is that same intersection. It's along Barton at Chandler, and that's been improved since we were out there for the road safety audit. That's just one of the things that's changed throughout the project. Another thing, there's some outdated pedestrian crossing signals that just have the hand or the walking person, but we're recommending to upgrade all of those to the countdown signal heads. And then there were a number of locations under consideration for additional pedestrian warning signs. This next slide just shows where these spots were. The rectangular rapid flashing beacon was where near the school, that blue dot. the need for additional high emphasis crossing, and the high emphasis crossing is the ladder style crosswalks. To get across Pontiac Trail, there's a number of locations, and then down in the heart of Lower Town. Pedestrian ramp upgrades, these were primarily identified through the road safety audit process. So those are the spots marked with green. Countdown signal heads in red. And then potential additional pedestrian warning sign areas are the purple dots. Additional pedestrian findings, things that could improve the pedestrian experience. Street trees and increased green belt. This came out of, I believe, the office hours. This came from the public engagement process. From the road safety audit, we identified gaps in the system for sidewalks or where fence was broke or missing. Lighting in general, the whole Lower Town, or the major routes throughout the Lower Town area are very well lit. There was only one stretch that didn't have lighting, and I'll show that in a minute. And then school improvements. We spent a day of the road safety audit just out watching the school and trying to come up with recommendations on how to more safely get the students to the school, separate vehicular traffic from where the pedestrians are coming. And then ideas for reducing traffic and managing speeds. I'll get into those later in the presentation. This map here shows where there's gaps in the sidewalk. And then the lighter pinkish color, it's Pontiac Trail down where it connects into Swift. That area does not have lighting currently. And then there's one little dot over at the Maiden Fuller Lane intersection. That intersection is lit up, but the one thing that we noticed during the road safety audit was that the lighting out there doesn't shine down on the pedestrian crossings. It's a little bit away from the crossings, and it could be improved for ped safety if it was more focused on those crossings. I'll take a break here, see what other questions we have.
There's a question in the chat from Cedria Clark about RFBs. Are they useful by the school when peak traffic and pedestrian hours are during daytime? So would they be used during the day and throughout the day? Would they be used all the way throughout the day, or only at the peak hour?
Steve, Darian, I know you have the most experience with schools. If you want to.
Yeah, let me talk about that. The whole idea of these rectangular rapid flash beacons is that they would be married to a sign assembly to let people know that pedestrians are crossing at that location, but they would be push button activated so that a pedestrian could walk up looking to cross the road, push the button to activate those rapid flash beacons so that it's a better announcement of the fact that they're seeking to cross the road. The push button activation would be available 24/7, not just because it's a school, not just for the times of arrival or dismissal of the school. It would be basically for any pedestrian needing to cross for any reason.
There's also a hand up. Do you want to take that? Go ahead, Lisa.
You should be able to unmute now.
I just typed in my question, but I'll read it to you. So I notice that you're planning to fill a sidewalk gap on the part of Barton that leads to the entrance of M14. Looks like you're planning on starting that at Breed, but I can't quite tell because the map wasn't very specific. So I wonder if you could specify where that will be and where there will be new crosswalks across Barton on that stretch, which leads to the Argo Pond Loop. So there are a lot of people who cross Barton there. And as Sadira Clark said, we are delighted either when the exit is closed for some construction reason or when there's congestion, because you can cross more easily and more safely when the cars are slowed down. Otherwise, they come around that blind curve at 30 to 35 miles an hour, and it's very dangerous.
What we did with, there were some obvious gaps in the sidewalk in the heart of the lower town, closer into the center. But what we did ultimately is we married up our graphic with what is in the City of Ann Arbor's Comprehensive Transportation Plan, and that identified this as an area of gaps in the sidewalk. Ultimately, this study is identifying these gaps, it's not saying that it's going to be built tomorrow. I don't know if Luke or someone from the city would have something further to say on sidewalk gaps.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Dish, for the question. We recognize that both sidewalk gaps and some crossings are needed in the area. So this product is a fusion of the recommendation from the overall transportation plan, as well as observation and what we have heard from the public as part of this study. So these are candidate locations. What's going to happen from here is we'll run these locations through the city's crosswalk guideline and figure out what's the best way to treat these locations. From the field review, we did find some locations like the one near 221 Barton or 212 in that number range, where the boardwalk has an opening to the road. But right now we're still in the evaluation process as to figure out what's the best way to treat that crossing, because the access from the roadway to the boardwalk is not ADA compliant. So that does put some limit as to how much we can mark or sign for it. But certainly, for users familiar with the facility, people can use it. So it's still a working process in a nutshell at this moment, but we're ready to take down any comments.
We have, Lisa, did you want to respond? I see you moving your mouth. You're muted.
Oops, sorry, I muted the wrong person.
Are you allowing me to speak? I had my hand up and could unmute.
1 second, Mary. I think Lisa just wanted to follow up on that
Thank
comment.
you.
We'll get to
Thank
you.
you.
Oh, I think
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to say thank you.
Thank you, council person. Sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Yes, thanks. I'd like to also thank Lisa. It's really bringing up that area with all of the little locations along Pontiac Trail, but nothing on Barton. In my opinion, you don't need to keep studying this. It's really dangerous, and there is no access that's safe for residents from the neighborhood. The crossing of Barton, you don't need to study this to death. It's dangerous, and there's no way to get across safely. The sidewalk linkage to me is less of a concern. It's getting across the street, and there might be, a little bit of a sidewalk added to the north side of Barton just to get far enough away from an intersection so that there is a safe flashing crossing. But a flashing crossing has been needed there forever, and that nobody's been killed is an absolute miracle. It's really nasty. It doesn't take study. Just do it. So, and also just thinking about what you've mentioned with part of the pedestrian experience is enjoying it. Put lighting in, but keep it warm temperature. Make it pleasant to walk, to slow down, to walk and observe where you're going. And places like Longshore, because it's not paved, it's slow traffic. That doesn't, common sense, that kind of an area doesn't need a sidewalk. It's already slow and safe, and it's a fabulous place to walk if you can get there from the other side of Barton. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks.
There's a couple questions in the chat. There was a question about the north side of Plymouth Road between Barton and Maiden Lane. There's no recommendation to fill in the sidewalk gap there. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can take on that one. So this year, I think there's a construction project happening on that stretch of Plymouth Road from Broadway, the southern junction outbound to maybe Murphy, if I'm not mistaken. So there has been some consideration, discussion among city staff for what improvement we can put in there. So right now it's that section has a little bit of room to extend the existing sidewalk and the bus stop. There, the ground elevation allows some extension, but not all the way to the intersection or traffic signal with Broadway. It's a pretty steep bank for the railroad up there. So providing that on the north side of the Plymouth Road is a little, there is some challenge there. I'm not saying it's not feasible. There's just some challenge there. So I think maybe a more practical solution or recommendation we're evaluating would be maybe some sort of mid-block crossing, making the connection between the two sides of Plymouth Road, so users can cross the street and make better use of the path that's on the south side of Plymouth Road.
Thanks, Luke. There's a question about which action items are most likely to be recommended to the Transportation Commission and City Council. I think that's the next part of the step or next part of the project, but I'll let Steve and Luke add any more detail on that.
Yeah, my thought is once we have a set of recommended mitigations from this study, there will be a presentation to the Transportation Commission for comment, for revisions. And then after that, these ideas will get plugged into future opportunities for implementation. They could be their own project. They could be part of other construction project, whichever comes first and become available. So I think the piece for council approval, it may not happen as the format of an overall package approval, but it will get evaluated and reviewed and approved through either individual projects or other projects that will carry parts of it. So Council Member Dish or Council Member Hefner, if I'm mistaken, please correct me. Thank you.
Are we considering slightly elevated crossings near the A2 STEAM school?
I assume by that you're talking about what we would call a tabletop speed hump, where on the flat part of it, the table part of it would be the pedestrian crossing. If that's what you are in fact inferring, we haven't finished our list of recommendations, and we were looking at some improvements, and we'd be happy to consider that and add it to the list of things that we're considering.
And then it looks like the last question here is historical proposals for a STEAM drop-off indicated on your slide have been ruled out as too close to Barton and the Pontiac Trail intersection. Has that changed at all? And I don't think we looked too closely at that, but I'll let others weigh in.
Is this from Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. For anything related to school, we haven't really looked very deep as part of this project. But as how they are related to the streets, then that's where we're drawing the line for the interface. There has been some ideas and proposals from the OHM team as to how to I guess propose some alternatives for the school drop-off. We're packaging those ideas, and we'll share those with public schools for consideration.
It looks like one more question popped in. Is there anything proposed for the intersection of John A. Woods and Traver?
John A. Woods is where the sidewalk ends, I believe. It's currently just shown as a potential for a sidewalk addition to the east of there. That's in this area.
Okay. Good questions, everybody.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the bicycle analysis approach. If you want to talk more about pedestrians, we can do that as we go through. Tom means the street. We have talked about ideas for the street. Do you have a specific idea or recommendation you want to put out there? Feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, the bicycle analysis approach. Again, we did the same type of thing that we did with the pedestrians. We did a bicycle environmental quality index. We also, during the road safety audit, considered bicyclists. And then we heard a lot from the public and stakeholders about biking in Ann Arbor, biking in Lower Town, where biking is lacking. So the bicycle environmental quality index gave us a couple graphics, and we had basic bicyclist conditions almost everywhere along Pontiac Trail. You can see some green, and I think that comes in there because there are bicycle lanes on road in that area. There's one red section off to the west side, and that's most likely because that's an unpaved road. So the key findings coming out of looking at the bicycle analysis, what we heard a lot is wayfinding signage is just not out there to identify where the bike routes are, where the bike routes end, where they start. Another major issue that was brought up is where bike lanes end and there's just nowhere for the cyclists to go. And one of the biggest spots or biggest issues for that is coming down Division as you're heading north towards the Broadway Bridge, and the on-street bike lane just ends abruptly. And another thing was on-street bike lanes. There's a number of areas around the Lower Town where an addition of on-street bike lanes were recommended or brought up by the public as needed. Some safety features. We heard that we saw this and we heard it from the public about trash cans being placed in the bike lanes. Obstructions on the Broadway Bridge. There's these pillars that stick out into the traveled way. The boardwalk is used for both pedestrians and bicyclists, and it's not really wide enough to accommodate both. And then There was a recommendation about a bike boulevard, and it was talked about having that along Chandler. Lanes adjacent to parking. It was recommended to widen the bike lanes along parking areas. That way, if vehicles are opening, closing doors, the bicyclists would have a little extra room to safely travel those routes. So the beginning and end of bike lane issues that were brought up and found are these green spots shown on the map. The lighter purple is where there's a potential to add on-street bike lanes. And then the darker purple is Chandler, where it was talked about having a bike boulevard. The bike boulevard basically separates bikes from motor vehicles. So, questions on bikes specifically?
I don't see any questions in the chat. Anybody want to raise their hand? We can always come back to if you think of things at the next break. Oh, there's a question. Is there the possibility of getting the Barton Street parking removed to complete the bike lane?
Luke, do you know the part that's under construction now? Or
Barton, yes. There's still a little bit of work being done on Pontiac Trail north of Barton.
I know there were sharrows added on Barton in that newly constructed section, but I'm not sure.
Oh, parking is still there for now.
Where the, okay.
Yeah, it looks like Karen has a question. Go ahead and unmute.
It's not really a question, but to help facilitate being able to ask a question, instead of when the next time we have a break, that on the video, you don't have just the thing that says question and answer break, but actually have something for us to look at, like the map, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we can go back to the map there.
But just in general, you know what I mean? Like, don't have that written there when we could be looking at something and then talk about it.
Okay, we'll pop back to one of the main exhibits whenever there's questions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What are the considerations?
Oh, were there considerations of eliminating on-street parking to accommodate dedicated bike lanes, potentially on Wall Street? The idea is that there's certainly enough parking there.
Yeah, I can comment on that a little bit. I know city staff, maybe this is disclosing this prematurely. Staff is working on some alternative cross sections on Wall Street, and one of them, I guess, is what I'm reading the comment is advocating to not do, and that is the floating parking lane as the separation between moving cars and bike lanes. So we'll take the consideration when we delve deeper into that project. But so far, we haven't considered removing parking on Wall Street, just because the street is fairly wide. A section of Wall Street near Nielsen Court, a small section of that, the parking has been converted to accommodate Michigan Medicine buses to stage there.
Okay. Luis had a question, getting from northbound Division over the Broadway Bridge and onto Pontiac Trail is problematic, difficult. Are there plans to make that easier to do?
We will get into some of the more specific things that we've been looking for that area and also getting onto Pontiac Trail further in the presentation.
And it looks like Mary has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't sure I heard it right, but Mr. Liu, when you were talking about a floating bike lane, where there's been comments in here about the door zone and cars, and I just wanted to clarify, were you considering, there's a bike lane on Division coming up from Hill Street.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous. I would never ride in that, and I'm an accomplished cyclist. It's a horrible idea. So I just wanted to clarify, please don't suggest that unless you yourself have ridden it and feel like you could have your kids ride it. Doors opening, you have nowhere to go. Whereas, in the street, you have plenty of room and cars can just give you a moment to get around. So thank you.
Got the comment. Yep, I heard it. So I guess the opinion is very clear. Don't do it, or as part of the design, there should be plenty of buffer to be provided to mitigate the conflict between a door opening and moving bike.
Well, bikes shouldn't be forced to be on the right of a parked car, period. It's a dangerous situation. It's really dangerous. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, what else we got in here? What's the rationale for providing a bike boulevard on Chandler? Will it provide an alternative to Pontiac Trail for bikers, which people use? But it won't solve any of the main problems for cyclists, which is essentially crossing the Broadway Bridge.
This was something brought up during the office hours. We had a cyclist that joined us nearly every time and talked about cycling ideas. That's true. It doesn't solve the problem of the Broadway Bridge, but it does take you off of the more heavily traveled Pontiac Trail, as you said.
Next question is there any consideration toward making better off-street connections over the Broadway Bridge or over the river there on Broadway, aside from just painted bike lanes?
That is one that I'm not sure we have addressed yet.
I think the only thing that I can remember that we considered was a connection down to the border-to-border trail on the south side of Broadway, but I don't think anything over the river.
Correct, right.
If
anyone has ideas on that, we're open to hearing them.
Another question about bike lanes. The width from parking on Barton encourages faster speeds. Have we considered removing the parking and adding a treatment like bump outs or a protected bike lane to make the road narrower and slow down traffic? I believe this would just be in that one spot where there is parking, on-street parking on Barton.
We have talked about removing the parking, but we've only looked at it eastbound approaching Pontiac Trail. I'm not sure the full limits of the parking on Barton.
I think it goes at least to Chandler, and could be mistaken, but it does narrow down further outbound toward M14. I think on the map we were considering the alternatives of both sides of Barton, so that there could be inbound bike lane as well as continuing the the outbound bike lane.
The idea of bump outs is on the table and will be mentioned later in the presentation.
I don't think we have any other questions, but there's some comments about bike lanes on Plymouth Road, maybe being uncomfortable for a lot of riders, especially in 35-mile-an-hour plus roadway. And then a comment about the sidewalk along the bridge as being an okay alternative, but getting on and off the bridge are difficult to navigate on a bike, specifically the ramps when you're coming from the south.
Yes, we definitely noticed it's difficult for a bike to go across the bridge and then get off of the bridge and into the on-street bike lane.
And an anecdote from Councilman Hayner: removing parking on Pontiac Trail for the bike lane actually increased road speeds. Bike lanes are needed, but speeds went up when that happened, which makes sense because the road got a little bit wider there. Another question about the width: has reducing the width of the Broadway bridge been studied? Is there a need for 2 lanes of traffic in both directions?
Yeah, I can provide some comments on this one. So last year, as part of the Healthy Street program, Broadway Bridge had 1 lane each direction reduced to accommodate non-motorized users. This year, it has not been part of the Healthy Street program, and also the future development at Broadway Park. When that development is taking shape, there will be a new traffic signal at the side entrance, and together with that, there will be a left turn lane into the site. So it's not really a net reduction of the total width of all travel lanes, but with the addition of left turn lane, the width of each travel lane will be narrower than currently.
Question about the rationale for the left turn lane. I believe that's for the new development, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any last questions before we move forward? Again, if you think of things, put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the next break.
I'm going to move on to transit. For transit, we did some field reviews during the road safety audit. We heard from, again, public and stakeholder engagement. And then we also held a brainstorming session, both with the public and with key stakeholders to get ideas. On this slide, you can see in the bottom right pictures along Pontiac Trail. This is a pull-off for one of the transit stops. And then in the top picture there's a bus stop, but there's also parking allowed right in front of it. So probably not the best for a bus stop to have parking right next to it. So transit findings, rider amenities. We heard there's a need for increased frequency and reliability of the buses. Our findings from the road safety audit were to upgrade the bus stops for ADA compliance. You can see in the 2 right pictures, there's no pad for pedestrians to load. You can see bottom right, this looks like it's used quite a bit. There's a path leading up to where the bus loads. So we found a number of those spots throughout the lower town that needed improvement. Additional park and ride opportunities. There is a park and ride lot off at US 23 in Plymouth Road. We looked for other opportunities where additional park and ride lots could be implemented, and I'll show a slide on that further into this presentation. Eliminate bus stop conflicts. I mentioned the one on the previous slide. And then someone from the public engagement mentioned transit signal priority to help move transit through the lower town area. This slide here is basically just shows where we found bus stops, where it was missing the landing pads or way to stops that were not ADA accessible. And that was all we had for transit. If there's anything specific on transit.
I think there was a question about plans for more bus stop shelters.
We have not, I don't think we had any comments so far about more bus stop shelters. Luke, do you know, is that the bus agency that picks those, or does the city have a say in that? I haven't heard any specific needs, specific locations.
Right. So far, that has not been, I guess, heard or proposed in this study. The city, of course, can make a recommendation. I think it's up for AAATA to make the final decision.
And then,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, there's a question kind of clarifying for each of these, what is, I guess, based on data versus public engagement comments for each of the recommendations. Maybe we can explain a little bit what each of these are actual recommendations. They're kind of came out of both, correct?
Yeah, all of what we're presenting here came from all different sources. I guess to make that more clear, it could be what came out of the road safety audit, what came out of traffic analysis, what came out of public comment. I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring that out through my speaking, but it's not on each and every slide for each item.
I think the greater takeaway is that you know, we came to these recommendations through a number of different sources, including hard data analysis with the traffic modeling, but also being out there in the field and looking at certain things in person, and you know, what the public, what you all have told us throughout the course of the project. So they're all equally valid in terms of what is being recommended. It's just depending on the source.
And any of these new ideas that we're hearing tonight, we'll definitely put that into a summary and add that to our considerations going forward.
There's a question from Adam. If I remember correctly, the AAATA removed a bus stop on the north southwest bound side of Plymouth Road a few years back because it was inaccessible without diving across the five lanes of traffic. Is there any consideration toward building pedestrian infrastructure like a mid-block crossing with an RRFB that would allow reinstating that stop? It would have been located at the rightmost orange triangle on the map. So right there.
Where is that, Eric?
Let me annotate here real quick.
Yeah,
that one.
Right there. Yeah, this was discussed not as part of this project, but as part of the Plymouth Road design that had already finished. So there was some discussion and consideration about a mid-block crossing that did not end up in a final design for that project. As of the Lower Town study, we will certainly, I guess, include in the discussion and propose the proper treatment following the crosswalk guideline. And for the previous discussion, it did include the location maybe in front of the complex, or it was closer to Jones. So yeah, that was, it has been on the discussion board.
Okay. Let's see, any other questions? Just another agreement about where the sources of the recommendations are coming from, which we can provide as part of the report.
Okay, I'm going to get on to motor vehicles. And then this is just a couple slides, and then it's going to get into more specific intersections and improvements. So for motor vehicles, it's looked at all the same stuff, but with motor vehicles, we also did traffic modeling of the existing conditions. And for existing conditions, this was pre-pandemic traffic volumes. So they're a little different now, but I think using the pre-pandemic volumes was conservative. We also did a crash analysis of the entire Lower Town area. Key findings for motor vehicles, and most of these came out of our road safety audit that we performed over a week's time. Pavement markings, there were some areas where the pavement markings were faded and needed upgraded and refreshed. Signing throughout Lower Town, there were some, and we specifically pointed out some of these through the road safety audit, and the city is looking into them. But some of the signs, for example, the one in the picture in the upper left, it definitely has lost all reflectivity. So we identified that by improving signs and putting up fresh, new reflective signs, that will definitely help the drivers at nighttime conditions. Pavement conditions, there was a few spots that could definitely use some upgrading or crumbling pavement, and we've identified that. Some guardrail that needed repaired or was improperly installed. Signal modernizations, newer style signals come in a box span configuration. Older style is the diagonal spans. There was a few locations that could be modernized. And then looking at the future, installing EV charging stations in Lower Town. And then, as I said, I'll get into intersection specific ideas. Some driver technologies that are being recommended. Changeable message signs coming into and through Lower Town, identifying maybe where there's traffic backups or if there's a train blocking, just what's going on in the area to help all modes of travel get through. Speed management concepts, as I said, I'll touch on that closer to the end of the presentation, and warning sign systems about traveling above speeds. Then transportation system management, transportation demand management, I'll touch on that as well. I'm guessing there's not going to be a whole lot of questions right now, but once I get into more specific recommendations, I'll move on to those. So there were high congestion intersections. We have 3 that were just based on observations from when we were out there. And then we also, as I said, we did our traffic modeling. And with the traffic modeling, we found some of the intersections had either failing or had failing movements at them. And the yellow dots are where we found failing within our traffic models. The observation locations were Barton at Pontiac Trail, Maiden Lane, Broadway, Moore, Maiden Lane at Fuller. But then in the modeling, Duvarn at Pontiac Trail, the M14 intersections, Plymouth at Barton, and then there was a division at Catherine Street. So Barton at Plymouth, what we found here is that in the AM peak hour or peak hours, there's a big delay on Barton trying to get out onto Plymouth. And it was showing over 70 seconds of delay. So what we looked at here is potentially changing the lane configuration. So instead of just being a left and a right out onto Plymouth, it could be a dual left with a shared right. And in doing that, we reduced the delay by over 20 seconds. And this isn't a huge change. You won't have to build additional lanes. It's more of a pavement marking, signs, and looking at the signal timing at that location. We looked at a number of things at the Barton at Pontiac Trail intersection. What we've heard and what we've seen, operational deficiencies, there's on-street parking at the intersection. We've had numerous people ask for the parking to be removed. In the AM peak, there are big delays on the approach to the intersection for eastbound traffic. In the lower right corner, you can see what a morning peak hour looks like as you approach that intersection. On average, it was 35 seconds of delay, which it can be much more than that. So one of the ideas at the intersection was to add a dedicated eastbound right turn lane that would go in that area where there was currently parking. And then it was looked at a modern roundabout that could also cut delays in half for the overall intersection. Currently out there today, there is this temporary bump out condition. It eliminates the parking near the intersection. It channelizes eastbound down to a single lane. So we're looking at restricting this eastbound parking. And we're also looking at the option of maybe this temporary bump out becomes something that we could make permanent. All right, do we want to see what questions have popped up on this so far?
Yeah, there's a couple. Oops, sorry, that was my fault.
All right, so the comments, well, go back to the Plymouth at Barton. I think people are talking about that first.
Oh, there's a comment before, a question before about changeable message signs and other technology and how that would change traffic levels.
Changeable message signs, that was also brought up. That was an idea that was brought up through our public engagement process. Steve Deering, did you know more about that? I think you've talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah, a lot of that was related to the, a lot of it was related to the impacts of Ann Arbor Railroad when they were bringing their freight trains through. And they tend to run long consists of train, slow moving, and it's not quite consistent in terms of the time that they come through that a commuter or anybody living in the neighborhood can really count on the train being there at a particular time of the day. So the whole idea of using technology to provide a wider knowledge of people that are coming into the area that the train is there and it's blocking multiple crossings all at once as it moves in and then moves back out. For example, if we could get MDOT to agree to it, if you could put some changeable message signs out on M14 so that people do not get off on Barton when the train is around. And that way those motorists know they can divert to a different route, and you don't have all these vehicles nose to tail waiting on the train. So that was a large part of the idea of trying to use technology to just circumvent these needless delays for dealing with blockages such as the train moving through.
Okay, looks like there's a number of questions about this intersection here. First, kind of how this change would affect cycling and pedestrian crossings and you know, coming through this intersection. And then the next are kind of about you know, what's this going to do in terms of adding speed to the intersection, and is it really needed?
The whole idea of that one was just you have traffic backing up almost to Traver in the morning. Once you have backups, you get drivers being anxious. I think someone might even have mentioned that. If you can clear traffic out, you know, it just eliminates that need to try to speed through there and rush through there. What else?
Let's go to Lisa. She's got her hand up.
Sorry, I was going to ask you about a stop sign at Duvarin and Pontiac, but you might not have gotten there already. Just, you know, the traffic on Pontiac, nothing slows it down from between 23 and the stoplight at Barton. And that means that cars are going 40, 45 miles an hour along there. When it gets congested, it's terrible for the people who live in Arrowwood or in the Brookside condo association, because they have only one way out. Their only way out of where they live is to turn onto Pontiac. And there are, you know, at peak hours, they can't make that turn. There's no alternative for them. So we need to find something to give them breaks in the traffic prior to the intersection. And oh, right. And then my other question was, you mentioned a modern roundabout being an option at Barton and Pontiac, but my understanding from my conversations with staff is that there isn't the room for that. So I'm interested if there is room for that. But were you assuming that the city would have to take some property in order to put in a roundabout there?
First, on your Duvarin comment, we will have a slide on that, and I will touch on exactly what you're talking about. At the Pontiac Trail Barton intersection, yes, we could look at a mini roundabout, but it's still gonna require, it's still gonna need us to acquire parts of properties.
No, it's not an option.
Okay, there's a question about a road diet on Plymouth. Has there been the consideration of that? Volumes are 27,000 or so. It would increase delay, but you'd likely have higher bike, pedestrian, and driver safety, and open up possibility for dedicated bike lanes. Thoughts on that?
Typically, a road diet starts getting questionable when you're around 15,000. So if it's, I don't see the question, but you said 27,000. That would really, if you want to slow it down, that's definitely going to slow it down. We haven't really been looking at a road diet just because the volumes are so high.
And I think maybe to build on that a little bit, there's a lot of comments in the chat about trying to slow down through both Barton and Pontiac Trail. And the idea of making that, I think it was the bump out that you showed, maybe more more permanent as part of a bike lane or something is liked, and trying to narrow down the streets so that folks feel like they need to go slower, I guess. That seems to be the main concern through the chat is fast speeds on those two streets.
Okay, there's a lot of comments, and I'm not sure which apply to which intersection on some of these.
We'll ask folks to raise their hand. We'll call on you, and you can feel free to speak up, and we can answer questions.
Okay, I just want to say the reason I'm showing this Barton at Plymouth alternative, because we're looking at peds, we're looking at bikes, we're looking at transit. We're not leaving out motor vehicles. So anywhere that we saw movements failing at intersections, we looked at this as an alternative that could make this movement no longer a failing movement. Is it a movement that the city's ultimately going to want to do? Is it definitely happening? It's not, but it's an alternative to help improve the flow of traffic. It has to be weighed against all modes of traffic. It has to be weighed against the bikes, the pedestrians. Is adding a second left turn lane here the answer? It needs to be weighed against all the options before it would become a ultimate recommendation.
I think it's maybe important to note the evaluation process and how we're going to refine these down. Your comments today are going to play into that. The priorities that and goals that you have will help us determine these. Yeah, like Steve said, it's not set in stone right now. These are just the universe of options that could be implemented depending on what you all want to see.
If there are things that you totally disagree with or you're totally against, it's good to hear that, and it's good to hear why. All right. Pontiac, Barton. Okay, so we've went through this. I know people are talking about getting rid of the parking altogether and having protected bike lane. That's noted. I'm going to move on to the next intersection, and we can talk more after we get through this if there's more discussion on these other intersections. All right, Steve, I'm going to let you handle this. You're on mute, though.
Hi, this is Steve Beering, and I'm going to take over just so Mr. Loveland has a little bit of a break. So this is probably the most complex and confusing intersection in the study area. Broadway, Division, Beeks, but it's also Cary and Summit and High Street and Detroit. So you have 7 streets that create this very complex junction. And it's come to our attention through a variety of reasons. The crash study showed it was the highest crash location in the study area. 73 crashes over a 5-year period. 10 of those involved injuries. It was also something that we noted very prominently when we did our road safety audit. It was also something that came up repeatedly during the stakeholder and other types of public engagement that we conducted. So, and city staff, they made a particular point of bringing this to our attention. So there's a lot happening here. And one of the ways that we have to try to analyze something as complex as this is we look at conflict points. That's where a vehicle will cross or intersect with another vehicle path. That's where a vehicle will intersect or cross a pedestrian path. That's how bicycle facilities, if they're on street, how that all interacts. And so there's a large abnormally large number of conflict points in this area. And of the 39 that we can identify, 14 involve pedestrian crossings. And that's just based on where the existing pedestrian crossing markings are today. And in addition to all that, we recognize that there's high speeds because Division and Beeks are one-way roadways. We recognize that especially northbound Division, there's a ped crossing that's basically within the curve as you're coming down and getting ready to cross over onto the Broad Street Bridge. And I believe Steve already mentioned the fact that we have this on-street bike lane that very abruptly terminates about 350 foot south of Cary, which means that cyclists are just kind of left to their own resources as they go into this very confusing junction. So what we did is we looked at different alternatives with the goal of trying to reduce the number of conflict points, where we were using conflict points as a surrogate for improving safety and reducing the number of crashes. And we came up with quite a few different alternatives, but the ones that seemed the most viable, at least at this moment in time, are being depicted here. And the middle one would eliminate the ability of Summit to go across Beeks and get to Detroit. It would also eliminate the ability of northbound Division to go down Cary to get to Depot Street, but pretty much all the other movements would be allowed. And that would help reduce the conflict points down to only 23 compared to 39. So you have 41% conflict points, and that would logically improve safety. And also by taking some of what is now pavement and turning it into greenbelt, well, it doesn't all have to be greenbelt. There should be room to be able to have a continuation of that northbound bike lane on Division, for example. You can look at trying to find better ped crossing locations where the peds and will have better visibility to the vehicles that are approaching, and vice versa. Then we looked at a few other alternatives that would have more restrictions on the movements that are currently available. For example, the top one would get rid of any and all access from Division to Summit and Summit to Detroit, but would otherwise maintain access to Cary and High Street. And that takes it down from 39 conflict points to only 16. So that's almost a 60% reduction in the number of conflict points. And then that lower right is even a further reduction by way of limiting traffic. Northbound Division could go to Cary, but if you're on Depot, you could no longer use Cary to come up grade to get onto the Broadway Bridge. And that took it down all the way to 14 conflict points, which is, about 64% fewer conflict points. These are just very simply looking at it in terms of the geometry of conflicts and how that would relate to safety. And then again, as you reconfigure this junction, you're going to be freeing up space that could then be used for more and better ped crossings, more and or better bicycle lanes, and things like that, especially if you don't have room on the Broadway Bridge. If you, for whatever reason, want to keep it a multi-lane facility for vehicles, you could then have a better way of getting a bike lane up to and then a ramp off onto the side path that's on the structure of the bridge itself. We have a lot of more work to do in terms of vetting this all out. We need to discuss with the city whether they want to look at yet more alternatives beyond these. I mean, this could easily turn into a study in and of itself. Or does the city want us to try to drive to some sort of a recommended alternative just based on these alternatives that we're showing here today? But again, most all of what we put our time and energy into was trying to simplify the intersection, to reduce conflicts, to reduce the number of crashes. And this probably has a number of questions.
This has a number of good ideas and things we should consider. Somebody did bring up closing off carry to vehicles altogether and providing ped and bike access only. There was also mention of the recent discussion of turning this into a two-way road division.
At the time when we were working on this, we were not aware of the city's interest in turning division into a two-way road. So these concepts were done a while ago based on the premise that, you know, it is what it is. We have this one-way pair being established between division and Beeks. I've been talking about conflict points and people are wondering, what do I mean about conflict points? We generally categorize conflicts as one of three kinds. There is a diverge, there is a merge, and there is a crossing. A diverge would be two cars following each other and one car wants to slow down to turn off down to a side street. And that means the likelihood of possible rear end crashes. Or if it's a multi-lane road, you might also have side swipes as somebody tries to get around that other vehicle that was abruptly slowing to turn. Merging conflicts would be vehicles on a crossroad trying to join into traffic flow. And that could be right turns or left turns, not necessarily in this circumstance, but the idea is you have to right turn and then get up to basically judge a gap in traffic, make your turn and hope that you haven't misjudged your situation so badly that somebody hits you broadside or rear ends you before you can get up to a reasonable operating speed. And that would apply right turn and left turn both. Crossing conflicts are almost always the most devastating kind of crash because those represent broadside crashes or head-on left turn crashes. And then those are the vehicle-to-vehicle conflicts. And then we also are looking at vehicle-to-pedestrian conflicts in terms of a pedestrian crossing a two-way road that represents two separate conflicts because they have to look in both directions for oncoming vehicles. So that's what we're talking about conflicts. The crossing of paths between various vehicles and or pedestrians. And again, it's used as a surrogate to try to then have a better handle on the relative safety of alternatives in terms of reducing conflicts. Almost always results in the reduction in crashes.
So a question about, it seems like there's some talk about these new, or these potential alternatives here that we're showing, maintaining or adding bike and pedestrian infrastructure, so crossings or sidewalks. And have we considered that? And is that something that could be maintained?
Oh yeah, the idea behind all of these alternatives is that we're simplifying vehicle operations and there will be excess area, pavement, that could then be repurposed so that there are improvements to pedestrian facilities and bicycle facilities. And then once we get deeper into looking at these, we would make judgments on, well, the pedestrian crossing is here today, but does it have to stay there, or is there better location that would represent a safer pedestrian crossing that also might also be a more direct based on what their desired line is in terms of getting from here to there.
Great, yeah. And then the other question I saw was, is reducing the Broadway bridge to one lane in each direction, would that potentially reduce conflict points?
When I was calculating the conflict points, I was not looking at it lane by lane, but rather movement by movement. So the fact that there are 2 northbound lanes of division that then pass by the side street from which you can get to either High Street or Cary, that's just one diverging style conflict. It's devilishly difficult to try to do it on a lane by lane basis. Everything multiplies, but it doesn't help you with pattern recognition. But yeah, if any of these facilities actually go down to just one lane, it would certainly even more simplify. There's no question about that part.
Okay. The question about on either side of Division and Broadway, kind of the triangle that we're showing there. The volumes, I guess, are around 11 and 13,000 vehicles a day. Has road diets on those areas been considered? Or, yeah.
We have not specifically looked into it. The one thing I wanted to ask Luke is, with the proposed development plans, and you said a left turn lane turning into the new development, what do they show as the cross section of the bridge?
Yeah, when that intersection is taking more shape than currently, so there will be a 5-lane cross section on the bridge near the entrance. So on one side there are 2 through lanes for each direction on Broadway, and a left turn lane into the site. On the other side, because it's a 3-way intersection, so the northeast leg would be still a 4-lane. So that's the cross section. Then there will be a pedestrian crosswalk at the traffic signal. So that's at that intersection. Now coming back to the junction of Broadway, Division, and Beeks and Summit, I think the value being presented in these options is to really simplify vehicle movements in this junction area. Still to maintain non-motorized permeability throughout this area. It actually does provide more opportunity and less conflicts to improve the condition for pedestrians and bicyclists. So if we zoom out to look at maybe a greater area for users driving, it may not be simplified, but we do recognize it's an opportunity to involve some slight detour to motor vehicles. Maybe some movements would involve using other intersections. I had a conversation with other staff members with City Longer, and to get a history about the discussion back in 2005 to 2006, when the Broadway Bridge was reconstructed. I believe the information indicated at that time the discussion even involved the intersection of Depot and Fifth. So that's just an example of, I guess, having a comprehensive evaluation of this intersection will likely cause the scope to go a little bit bigger to figure out, to address the needs for all users. So it's just one example.
Let's see too many other. So Luis asked if there would be a left turn lane onto North. When the old DTE lot is developed, would there need to be a left turn lane onto the northbound side of the Broadway bridge? Not sure which.
That's the left turn lane.
Okay.
Into the site. Yeah, and also I guess we heard some discussion about future conversion of Division Fifth to the one-way pair to two-way street conversion, and we did hear about that discussion fairly recent before tonight's meeting, and the whole team heard about it. So what we come into a common place between the Lower Town study and what's being proposed is that we're seeing what areas are in alignment and what are the potential conflicts. So as this Lower Town study, we're not really putting out any specific design for this intersection. We're not seeing direct conflicts, but as we delve more into the detail of looking into how the bicycle lane on northbound division should be handled or addressed in this area, that would be the topic where we need very close coordination with the two-way conversion project.
Okay, I think we've hit on most of them, so in the interest of time, might as well keep moving.
Okay, as brought up previously, the Pontiac at Duvarn intersection. So this is at the northern end of our study area. We are aware of high speeds coming in from the north. High speeds, we're hearing high speeds all along Pontiac Trail. What our existing modeling showed us was that westbound Duvarn can have delays trying to get out because there's enough traffic on Pontiac Trail and the speeds are so high, it makes it difficult to turn onto Pontiac Trail. So what we've looked at here is we did do a signal warrant analysis, and a signal would be warranted here. The problem with putting a signal in is when it's still green on Pontiac Trail, it would give the gaps for people to turn off of Duvarn, but it's not going to ultimately slow down traffic on Pontiac Trail, except when they have to stop at the intersection. We've also looked at a roundabout, and a roundabout would definitely be a very good option here. Operationally, it would work very well, and it would be a great opportunity to slow traffic coming into the Lower Town area. That is all I have on that intersection. We'll move on to the next one. Okay, the next one we looked at is over Barton, over at the M14 interchange. And what we've been seeing is that in the AM, the ramp coming off of M14 is failing with 55 plus seconds of delay. This is an all-way stop intersection currently today where that yellow dot is shown. And then in the PM, westbound Barton fails. And it's approximately at least a minute on average. It can be much more than that. 59 seconds is the average. Again, at this intersection, we've also looked at a signal warrant analysis. This does meet warrants and could justify a signal, but this is an MDOT intersection and would need to be reviewed as part of an MDOT interchange treatment. I see there's comments coming in. Do we want to touch on some of those now?
There was one comment about or a couple comments about the roundabout. I think either of the Steves might be able to touch on the safety related to roundabouts with vehicles and bikes and pedestrians.
Why don't you go back to the slide for Varun?
Yeah, I'm having trouble with my chat. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Are you doing it, Eric?
There we go. Okay, so in this context, this is intended to be what we would call a compact roundabout. It's intended to be designed with a relatively low operating speed of somewhere around 12 to 15 miles an hour. It would only be one lane entry, one lane exit. At 12 to 15 miles an hour, most confident cyclists would choose to just ride through it as though they were a vehicle. If you are not a particularly confident cyclist, it could be designed so that there would be ramps to allow somebody that was a biker riding on the street to get off onto the sidewalk to circulate as though they became pedestrians. With these kinds of designs in this context, they are considered to be very safe for both bicyclists and pedestrians. For a vehicle to have to get down to only 12 to 15 miles an hour to even to be able to negotiate it, it means that when pedestrians are looking at crossing either the entry or exit points of any particular arm of the roundabout, the vehicles are already down to a very slow pace. Generally speaking, when you do a direct comparison of a roundabout with a traffic signal, roundabouts have far fewer conflict points, and the safety performance is that they are usually considered much better than a traffic signal, especially for pedestrians.
Some of the questions and discussions about roundabouts and cycling and pedestrians. There's the intersection at Duvarn and Nixon that has a roundabout. I believe it's set up with bike lanes of 15, and then it gives you the option to get off before you enter the roundabout. Or you can actually, if you're a more experienced cyclist, you would enter into the actual circulating lane. Also at that intersection, there might be more pedestrian traffic than there is here, but this roundabout would also have sidewalks and accommodate pedestrians. And with only single lane approaches, you're only crossing one lane of traffic at a time, and you only have to look in one direction. I don't know if we addressed all the questions, but we could.
Looks like there was a question that just came in about level of service. What weight has it been given? It seems contradictory to pedestrian cyclist safety to use level of service as a metric to be maximized in the analysis of alternatives. I think, well, I'll first say that we haven't evaluated anything yet. These are all just options, and the fact that folks are saying that pedestrians and cyclists are more important in this neighborhood or this area is is considered, and as we design the evaluation criteria, that'll be able to reflect that.
Want to address the comment from Mary, talking about how cyclists have to consistently switch between bike lanes and roads, sidewalks.
Well, the one thing, and I think Adam pointed this out in the last comment that's on there, as you approach a slower single lane roundabout, he said the important thing is to take the lane. So where you have the option to get off onto the sidewalk, if you stay in the roundabout, you take over the lane. You're in the center of the lane. There's slow moving traffic as you're approaching the roundabout, and then you drive through the roundabout just like a vehicle would. You look to your left, and if there's an opening, then you go.
I think it's also maybe important to note that, as Steve mentioned, this is a 10 to 15 mile an hour roundabout. That's pretty consistent with how fast people ride their bike typically, and you're not going to be overtaken by a car coming through here. And as someone who's ridden through a lot of roundabouts, it's really pretty easy. It's no really different than riding on a slow street.
The one other thing I'd like to mention is that what we're trying to do is give options. There's a lot of confident cyclists in the Ann Arbor area, and that's wonderful. But there might also be very confident cyclists that would not feel comfortable. We're not saying that everybody has to get off and use the sidewalks. We're not saying everybody has to stay on the road. We're leaving it up to the riders to figure out what's right for themselves.
So cars would know, if a cyclist gets off at the sidewalk, the typical way of doing that, if you're going to cross, is to get off your bike and walk across the intersection. And should you get off on the sidewalk and do that, that is what you're supposed to expect. If you go through the roundabout, like it's as it's designed, you wouldn't have to get off and would continue on your way.
I think the question is around how can cars know what the cyclist is about to do? Is there proper signage that lets cars know what rights the cyclists have?
Well, I think it was Adam that said the key is that the cyclist has to take the lane, and that's exactly right.
Do cars know that cyclists have that right, though? I think that's what it sounds like the question is. So sure, cyclist decides to take the lane, but do the cars know that they have that permission?
That is the fundamental vehicle law in Michigan. The Michigan Vehicle Code has made it explicit that bicyclists have all the rights and responsibilities of vehicles, and that includes taking the lane. And if a driver doesn't know that, well, maybe they need to have their license revoked until they can get some remedial training on what the rules of the road are.
Maybe we just need to consider some additional signage, because I didn't know. I'm not sure that everyone knows that what the rights that bicyclists have are, and it can get confusing and dangerous in a roundabout situation.
Right, it could be science, it could be education, it could be outreach. So this is, I guess, another level beyond just the design for the facility. it's really get the message out there for our road users to understand the importance of bicyclists.
Have there been any considerations given to potential growth of micromobility, like scooters, bike share, things like that? I don't think we've explicitly considered scooters, but you know, what essentially the same types of infrastructure that cyclists are riding on is also recommended for scooters.
Okay, let's go back to, let's keep moving on with the presentation or we won't get through all the slides here.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna move on.
Yep. So I'll take this one over again. Now we're at Moore, Pontiac, and Longshore, which is another very confusing junction of roads. And this is another one that we picked up as having a relatively minor crash history, but it was certainly something that we noted with our road safety audit. And again, it was also pointed out to us by city staff, some of the stakeholders, and I think it came up also with the different office hour sessions that we held. So to the north is Pontiac, and it's a two-way road, but at this junction, there's basically a split. Moore coming off of Broadway is a one-way in, and then Pontiac south of here, heading down towards Swift, is also a one-way. So this is where the two-way Pontiac becomes, with Moore, functioning like a one-way pair. And the geometry is confusing because traffic on Moore coming up that wants to go to northbound Pontiac does not have to stop. And traffic coming south on Pontiac does not have to stop, but all the other movements do. And one of the things that we noted and also was pointed out to us was the fact that there are not pedestrian crossings all the way around the intersection. There's no pedestrian crossing of Moore. And the ped crossing of Pontiac on the north leg, because of the angles involved, traffic that wants to go from Moore to northbound Pontiac can do so at a relatively high speed. The angle of the intersection, that skew actually is conducive toward taking the corner at much higher speeds that you would normally associate with the right turn at an intersection. And then just to make it confusing, we have the train track immediately north of the intersection. Pontiac north of the intersection has bike lanes, but the northbound bike lane does not start until after you've crossed the railroad tracks, whereas the southbound bike lane crosses the tracks and then ends at this intersection. So there's a lot of things happening here that we wanted to take into consideration. But with this particular intersection, the thing that we were focusing on most was the fact that there's a fair amount of confusion about this intersection. If you look at the picture, you're going to see a vehicle that looks like it's trying to make a left turn from Pontiac onto Moore, except Moore is a one-way road.
Okay.
So just the nature of the geometry makes it confusing for everybody. So again, we looked at alternatives, and again, the mantra of conflict points. If you can reduce conflict points, you're going to reduce the potential for crashes. And we had a whole range of alternatives. In the top right, basically doing a better job with pavement markings and signs. to try to eliminate anybody making the southbound left turn to go wrong way down more, which is one way. Making it a lot more clear that there is the pedestrian crossing of that north leg of Pontiac, so that drivers are more respectful in terms of taking that corner at a slower speed. So that doesn't do anything to reduce the number of conflict points, but it would still clean up the intersection and make it a little bit more obvious to drivers what's actually happening there. Then if you go to the bottom right, yes, we know that there's an island there to help the northbound more kind of make that sharp, almost a U-turn to go south on Pontiac. But that island actually could be a lot larger and more prominent to, again, help cut off that whole idea of a wrong way southbound left turn onto more. It would also, depending on how it's designed, we might be able to make the more to northbound Pontiac a little bit sharper, kind of reduce the radius for cars to get them to slow down a little bit more. And then when you get to what would kind of be in the center middle, now we're talking about a much, much larger island that would actually cut off some of the movements so that, for example, more could not go down Longshore. And this will also fit a roundabout. And with the splitter islands of a roundabout, you would then have a better location to put the pedestrian crossings, using the splitter island as a refuge so that pedestrians only have to worry about one direction of travel at a time as they work their way across the road. Again, from just painting signs, we're not doing anything to reduce conflict points. Taking it to the extreme of cutting off movements, that gives us the 44% fewer conflicts. The roundabout is kind of in the middle range. It would reduce conflicts, but not as much as just cutting off Longshore from more. So again, alternatives, we need to evaluate it more, but these are some of the ideas that we came up with to try to simplify this intersection, with the goal being more simple for vehicles, more simple for pedestrians, reduce conflicts where possible, and we would then expect it to operate much more safely. And I'm just going to go forward with this last one, but we can always, when I finish Broadway at Maiden Lane and more, then we can go back and talk about either of them if you want. This is another one where it came out through our road safety audit. There was, again, some crash experience here, but it was an unusually number. It was not an unusual number. And we also had various inputs from our outreach program to hear what people are thinking and talking about. And also our modeling. Our modeling noted that there's some, not a lot, but there's some congestion on Broadway at this intersection, with about 25 seconds of average delay in the morning, about 32 seconds of average delay in the evening commuter times, which is not bad. That's not bad at all. But then particular movements, the southbound left, that would be southbound Plymouth, to turn left onto Maiden Lane. In the morning, that's particularly heavy with a lot of delay, just short of a minute delay there. And then in the evening, it would be both the northbound Broadway left onto Moore, as well as the northwest bound Maiden Lane to make a left to go onto Broadway, both of those represent high levels of delay, 68 and 56 seconds respectively for Broadway to Moore, and then Maiden Lane to Broadway. A common theme that we saw in this area is that we have speeding issues associated with traffic on Plymouth and Broadway. Once again, there's a discontinuity of some of the pedestrian and bicycle facilities that were already noted in the presentation before. It's already a signalized intersection. It's certainly, we looked at whether we could just retime things to make things work a little bit better. And that really didn't do a whole lot. So what we thought here as a possible alternative would be another modern roundabout. If Broadway and Plymouth remain multi-lane roads, then it would be 2-lane approaches and departures for those legs. On the other hand, Maiden Lane and Moore, single lane, not a big deal. Recognizing that there is this interest in parts of the city to get rid of one-way roads. If, for example, they wanted to try to do two-way traffic on Moore, a roundabout would be able to accommodate that, especially if you put a roundabout up at Pontiac and Longshore. You just have to add the additional connection so that that junction could bring traffic back south on Moore. Or if you wanted to keep Moore one way heading north, not a problem, no big deal. It gets the approach delays way, way down. And it would go with, and if it were to be considered, it would go with our recommendation that we install a type of pedestrian signal called a hawk signal that would literally provide a red light stop to vehicles for pedestrians seeking to cross the various crossings of the roundabout. And so, for example, if you had a hawk signal, a set of hawk signals on that southwest leg, there would be a hawk signal to stop Broadway approaching the roundabout, and there would also be a signal stopping traffic coming out of the roundabout heading southwest on Broadway. And the hawk signals are push button activated by the pedestrians. And again, the splitter islands are considered the refuge islands. So pedestrians only have to really deal with one direction of traffic at a time as they make their crossing. So that was the idea that we had here if the city wants to do something about the congestion issues that we noted.
Okay, just a couple more slides and then we are wrapped up. If there's any last minute questions, you can put them in the chat. The last couple slides, this one's transportation demand and system management. Operational deficiencies. There's congestion during the peak periods. We've discussed that, the AM and the PM peak period, and what does all this traffic bring but vehicle emissions. So alternatives that we're looking at, if we improve the non-motorized facilities, that's hopefully going to lead people that drive to more often bike and walk. If we improve public transit, we can get more people to ride transit instead of driving their own vehicle by themselves. We've looked at opportunities for park and ride lots, and there's some ideas shown here as the yellow dots on the map. Plymouth at 23 is already there, but there's more opportunity to even add more parking out there. Looking at the M14 Barton Interchange, looking at the park up on Juvarn as a possible opportunity, and then going even further out up to like North Territorial. What else? Ride sharing programs, encourage ride sharing programs through education, incentives to give up parking, work on flexible work times, get together with, for example, the hospital and look at different start times, transit supportive development, and then looking at just retiming signals and coordinating signals in general. The last topic is speed management alternatives. And we have heard from many people, and we've seen it ourselves, there's noted high speeds on Broadway, Pontiac Trail, Division, Plymouth. I think we've even heard it for Barton today. And why are speeds important, critical, because we're looking to improve the pedestrian and the bicyclist safety. So some of the alternatives we're looking at for speed management, we've talked a lot about roundabouts. This roundabouts really help slow down traffic. We've talked about potentially turning Pontiac Trail into a roundabout corridor, and you've already seen that with different intersections that we're talking about. Median islands, just limiting the amount of pavement that cars have to drive on tends to slow down speeds. Neck downs or bump outs up at intersections, like what we've seen as that temporary condition at Barton and Pontiac Trail, those help to slow down traffic. On-street parking, when there's parking that's utilized, that can tend to slow down traffic as well. But if you have on-street parking that's always open, that facilitates faster speeds. Speed actuated signing, similar to what's in this photo here. Something that maybe flashes red, you're going too fast, stuff like that. Gateway treatments, which are what is shown in this lower right picture at crosswalks, signs. Having cars have to squeeze between these signs helps to slow down and draw attention to pedestrians crossing. And then on-street bike lanes, narrowing the lanes. We are still in the process of looking at speed management alternatives and where to apply the different techniques, but it's definitely one of the top priorities for this study. And that is protected bike lanes. Very good.
There was a question about hawks at the roundabout on Broadway, Maiden, Plymouth intersection. If that, there's a high demand of pedestrians at certain times of the day and they're actuating the hawk signal, is that going to cause an inordinate amount of delay?
I'll try to take that. If there's truly a high demand for pedestrians, then what could be done, doesn't have to be, but what could be done is, well, let's think about how a hawk signal works. Pedestrian walks up, presses the button, and the signal heads for the hawk are normally black. They're not energized. And the first thing that happens is they energize, and it starts by turning on a flashing yellow. Then it goes to a solid yellow and then the red indications. And after the red is achieved, a solid red is achieved, then the pedestrian gets the walk signal to start their way across. They're only going from possibly an outside to a splitter island, so it's a short crossing. It doesn't have to be a lot of time given to the walk before it does the clearance. And if there's not a subsequent activation, the signal eventually goes dark again. If there were a lot of pedestrians and you wanted to somehow balance between the pedestrian usage and the cars, you could fiddle a little bit with button is pushed. How long does it take to wake up the signal? Maybe it's just a few seconds. Maybe it's a little bit more than a few seconds. That's if you really wanted to bias it toward making sure that the vehicles are moving. Or you could keep it kind of instant gratification if you want to bias everything toward the pedestrian instead. The thing about roundabouts is that once pedestrians clear and the roundabout starts functioning again, they are simply amazing at how quickly they can dissipate queues. They're far more efficient than signals in that regard. So I'm not particularly worried about high pedestrian use and roundabouts with hawk signals, because I think it's all going to balance itself off. Pedestrians, especially in the morning, given the flows of traffic that we see with the U of M Medical Center, they tend to be, you can actually talk about platoons of pedestrians as much as you can talk about platooning of cars. So there might be these little intervals where you have a lot of pedestrians, but then, you know, their demand is taken care of and the roundabout resumes functioning very well for motor vehicles. So in my opinion, it's really not that big a deal.
Okay. And then there was another question about Pontiac Trail being a state road. We were told there can be no real traffic calming because of this.
Pontiac Trail is an arterial. It's still a city street. So right now the city does not have an official major street traffic calming. So that's where I guess the terms could be a little confusing. But right now staff is looking into mitigations to control speed or mitigations to help lowering speeds along arterials. So yeah, the speed management on Pontiac Trail, those are measures we can look into, we can discuss and deploy.
And then another question about speed cameras. Have those been considered for speed management? Those are kind of sticky in the US, I think.
I didn't think that was I didn't think Michigan
allowed in
was.
Michigan, right.
All right.
I think that's everything.
One of the questions was somebody has a preference for the rapid flash rectangular beacons as opposed to hawks. The reason we were suggesting hawks at Broadway, Plymouth, Maiden Lane, and more is that unless things change, the presumption is that Broadway and Plymouth would remain multi-lane roads, and you'd have 2 lanes circulating from those entrances and exits. And the trend in the United States, well, first of all, in terms of the regulatory environment, the National Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, yes, you'd be allowed to use either rapid flash beacons or hawks at roundabouts that have multiple lanes for entry and exit. But there appears to be a trend toward hawks because they are a more positive guidance in terms of requiring drivers to stop, as opposed to rapid flash beacons, which are basically just informing drivers that there are pedestrians present and seeking to cross. And again, we are talking about multiple lane roundabouts. Incrementally, if the city wanted to start with rapid flash beacons and then move to hawks if it was necessary, that's fine. If there was a roundabout to be built with multiple lanes, we would recommend that they put all the conduits and handholds, all what we would call the electrical plumbing in place. So it could be either a rapid flash beacon or a hawk signal, depending on what the city wants to do. So incremental approaches are appropriate. It's just that our experience is if it's truly a need for a multiple lane roundabout, hawks are better for pedestrians because of the positive driver, you have to stop.
Steve, can you go on and comment on hawk versus the 3-section pedestrian signal?
What a hawk signal is, it's even though it's providing that imperative to a driver that they have to stop, it's still considered an intersection beacon. So the regulatory requirements are a lot looser and easier to achieve compared to a traffic signal. If it is a traffic signal, you still, under Michigan law, you still have to meet the warrants or the criteria for the installation of a traffic signal. And for example, you want a hawk, if you can demonstrate that there's the potential of maybe up to around 20 peds an hour, no big deal, put it in. If it's a traffic signal and you're trying to justify it based on pedestrians, you got to be able to show, you have to show, not just anticipate, but actually show 150 pedestrians an hour before you can put a full traffic signal in. Hawks were designed to be easier to get than a full traffic signal as a way of providing a benefit to pedestrians by having a positive control over the drivers as whether or not they're going to cross a pedestrian crossing.
Okay.
Thank you.
I got one last slide, and it's just next steps. So we will pull together a summary of the questions and comments from today's meeting, and we will post that on the project website. We will also have a video of this public meeting up there. Going forward, coming out of this meeting, we will consider what we've talked about tonight. We'll further consolidate and refine these alternatives. We also have to continue our analysis and evaluation because we are just getting the future traffic volumes together to look further out into the future to see if these options are the right options. And then we are in process of beginning the final report. Between now and the next public meeting, we are looking to get these office hours together again, which is basically just an hour meeting where we can get together and talk about different topics of the project. If there's any specific topics you would want to get together and hear more about or dive deeper into, we're open to that as well. And then finally, the final public meeting would be what our ending overall findings and recommendations are coming out of all this. Anything else?
Don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, we hung with us, many of you, for over 2 hours. Thank you for coming and participating.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.